Surprise! We're back with a bonus episode for you guys this week. So just as a bit of a setup, a few weeks ago, Alice and I were super thrilled to be invited to go up to Bendigo to the Emporium Creative Hub to do a live podcast collaboration with an awesome podcast called Country Creatives, with hosts Caleb and Reece and their beautiful producer Amy. So we went there, we had a bit of an audience, we did this live recording, and it was such a gorgeous conversation. We went and had burgers afterwards, we had a great day, and it was just cool to connect with other people doing really similar stuff to us, really, just trying to figure out what creative life looks like, how other people are doing things, the way they do things, their processes and stories. And yeah, it was a great time and a great chat. So enjoy this little added bonus for your week. And of course, don't forget, our live show is this Friday, 26th of May. There are still, I think, about 7 tickets left. Not many at all. So best way to find all Imposter Pod related stuff is just go to our website, impostersyndromeclub.com, or you can find us on Instagram at imposterpod. We've just started our Patreon. If you'd like to become a patron, we would absolutely love it for you to do that. Probably the best way that you can support the podcast. And if you do it before midday on Friday, you will get free entry to the live show. So that's becoming a patron of any level at all will get you free access to the live show, free slice of pig cake. If you don't know what that means, listen to a few of the old episodes. All right, well, enjoy this extra bonus ep, and we will hopefully see you on Friday, otherwise in your ears next week.
Reading our own bios, that's what we're going to do to kick this off, so that you can get a bit of an idea of who is sitting at this table.
It's a brutal, for context as well to add, it is a brutal tradition that Jessamy and I started on our podcast, and we get all our guests to do it, and it is always awkward. It is always cringy. And we never have to do it ourselves.
This is a real dick move. This is
with an audience.
Taste of our own medicine. So you want to start.
All right. And Reece.
All right, I'll rip off the Band-Aid, and you're right, it is pretty cringy. This is straight off the Nacho Station website.
Right.
This is what's out there publicly. Besides having a magnetic personality, Reece is a qualified graphic designer with a passion for all things creative. Reece was fascinated by street art from a young age and decided early on he wanted to draw for a living. While studying graphic design at La Trobe University, he discovered the joy and power of collaboration through founding his own magazine, where he worked with over 30 artists, photographers and illustrators. Following his studies, Reece worked for a number of, I'm going to skip through a bit of career stuff.
Is that allowed?
It's cheating.
Yeah.
Is it cheating?
We'll allow it.
It's a very long, continue please.
By 2019, the side hustle, being Nacho Station, became a full-on hustle, which is when Reece took the plunge and, in his own words, went full-time Nacho. Ever since, Reece has made good progress in his quest to make Bendigo a street art hotspot, and is now turning his attention to towns around central Victoria, and hasn't ruled out taking the world after that. Ultimately, however, what gets him up in the morning is seeing how collaborative creative projects can engage, uplift and reinvigorate communities.
Woo, very
Awesome.
nice. How
That's
did you feel reading that?
I should have summarised a little bit. I feel like it sort of dragged on a little bit.
Oh, no,
No.
that's you in your own head.
Yeah.
No one else is thinking that.
Yeah,
Holy
it's
summer.
new information for us, so
Yeah.
it doesn't feel long at all. That's fascinating. That's so good. I have so many questions.
It's really interesting as well, that feeling, which is very, very common, it would seem, for people. Like, for you, that feels like you're like, oh my God, I've been speaking for like 15 minutes. Everyone's like, shut up, we don't care. But from the outside, it's like, no, this is just a list of really interesting things about you.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
All
What
right.
was the name of the magazine, by the way?
Flair magazine. There's actually someone in the room who was a part of that as well. Pat up the back here, graphic designer and writer, I think. Did a few things in there.
Awesome.
So yeah, that was like a university kind of post-university project, which is pretty cool.
Very cool. We're going to go one for one, so one of you guys to go next.
Okay, I'll go next.
Great. You've got this.
Thanks, buddy. I feel like the first line, like with your magnetic personality, is always like the cringiest. Okay, here we go. Jessamy G is a creative force in the visual communication world. As the director of creative agency Think in Colour, she's all about turning big ideas into things of beauty. Since launching Think in Colour in 2011, Jessamy has become internationally renowned for her work, servicing a diverse range of clients all around Australia, New Zealand, Asia, Europe and the USA across the corporate, community, education and government sectors. In addition to her professional work, Jessamy is also actively involved in the creative community, founding Graphic Recorders Australia in 2019, becoming the first Australian director to serve on the board of the International Forum of Visual Practitioners in 2020, taking over the role of chapter host for Creative Mornings Melbourne in 2021, and in 2022 launched the Imposter Syndrome Club podcast with co-host Alice Eady. In short, your girl's been busy and she likes to talk.
Hey, that was great. I love that.
cool is she?
Oh, very cool. Oh, man, that is fascinating. How are we sitting at this table with Jessamy G? I don't know. But welcome.
Like it's all lies. It's smoke and mirrors. It's smoke and mirrors.
That's so good. All right, I'll go.
Over to you.
Psych myself up. All right. Caleb Maxwell is the co-founder and creative director of Hebron Films, a video production company that helps regional businesses perform on the world stage by creating strategic online video content. He and the Hebron team work directly with businesses as their go-to video communication expert. As a creative entrepreneur, Caleb spends his time building commercial endeavours that strengthen regional creative industries and increase opportunities for creative practitioners. Caleb's love for community has led him to serve in many different organisations, including the Army Reserves, national charities and local community organisations. He's a member of local advisory groups for the City of Greater Bendigo's Creative Industry Strategy, and also the Emporium Creative Hub, where Hebron Films operates from. Caleb is the co-host of Country Creatives, a podcast that helps regional creatives thrive in the commercialisation of their creative practice.
Nice. How did it feel reading it out loud?
Yeah, you kind of have the urge to read it really quickly.
Yeah.
But no, not too bad. Not too bad.
Just a quick sidebar before we throw you into the deep end for the final one, Alice. Did you guys both write your own bios?
No, I had a copywriter.
Ooh, I did actually write mine.
Yeah. It's just an interesting thing. Well, this most recent iteration was actually a collaboration between myself and ChatGPT.
Yes.
Who Creative Force was that?
That was ChatGPT. I was like, thanks, mate. These robots are not so bad. Which is an interesting experience because I think so often, I mean, the like extreme awkwardness of writing about yourself in the third person anyway, but also the thing of like looking at a blank page and being like, where do I start? So that where it ended was quite far from what ChatGPT spat out, but it was nice to have that, like to take the ick away from the
Starting point.
Jessamy is a creative force. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And you're not starting from like you said, the blank page, which is terrifying.
Yes,
Famously terrifying.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, can I just preface this though?
We'll allow it.
So I have two bios, and as I realized reading this one this morning, this is like more than 2 years old, which in and of itself tells you so much about where I'm at. So I have my professional one, which is Jessamy and I do the same job, the live illustration, and then this is the one I'm going to read is for my art practice. So buckle up for some very wanky art talk.
Ready.
It's coming. So Alice Eady is an artist, calligrapher and typographer living in Melbourne, Australia. Alice is interested in exploring the verbal visual thresholds of the sign via mark making, both analog and digital. Currently pursuing a Masters of Fine Art at VCA, Alice also has a master's degree in English literature from the University of Cape Town and an undergraduate degree in fine arts from the University of Johannesburg. Born and raised in Johannesburg, Alice has shown in South Africa at the Kalashnikov Gallery and at Salon 91, as well as the Nyrox Sculpture Park in Maropeng. As part of a 1-month artist residency at NIROX, she hosted a series of artist talks at the Words, Arts and Literary Festival in 2016. Since moving to Australia in 2017, Alice has presented at conferences and workshops, including COVA at the University of Melbourne and TDK, the Design Kids How We Work panel, and lecturing at General Assembly. Alice will be the keynote speaker at Creative Mornings in Melbourne in September 2021. In conjunction with her fine arts practice, Alice has worked as a freelance illustrator since 2010. She specializes in graphic recording or scribing, a form of live drawing that facilitates rich conversation within groups. She has collaborated across a wide variety of industries, including technology, education, and the public sector. Alice works from her studio on Johnston Street in Abbotsford, which I have not worked. I have not worked there in 2 years. And just a little, like a side note, the talk that I refer to in the future tense Creative Mornings talk was called the Imposter Syndrome. It's hosted by Jessamy, and that's where the whole idea for our podcast began. So
Wow. Well, it's pretty special then. It's the origin story.
it's the origin story, but through this time capsule of a bio.
I love that. I feel like we should have like two flipboards like up next to each of you. You could be
Put us to
talking
work.
for you to
How
work.
much money you got?
I'm fascinated at this practice. I have seen people do it in presentations before, but you guys must be superstars.
It's really interesting work. So graphic recording, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's essentially like creating infographics in real time. So we work a lot at conferences and workshops where we're listening and taking a combination of pictures and words and creating these sort of real-time graphics, which is like the coolest part about it is you get to be a little fly on the wall in all these different industries. But speaking of like experiencing imposter syndrome, particularly early on, it's this really interesting, odd balance of things because we're like the dumb creatives, right? We're like, I don't know what you do with money. And then we're put into this like the most corporate of corporate worlds. And at least for like the first few years, I mean, I'm speaking for both of us here, but I know that it's been a common experience. You don't know where you sit in that because you're being hired as a creative, but you're also working in this very corporate world and you don't quite yet have the kind of confidence to show up. So I used to like wear like my $50 like Kmart suit and like, is this what you want, corporate world? Is this what you want me to be? And then it's been quite a journey to sort of discover that actually like all of those more like rough, interesting bits of you're not going to succeed in that world in spite of them. You're going to succeed there because of them.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Do you find that like all these non-creative people in the room are like probably like, oh my God, how do you even do that? And they're like praising your work because they're completely not creative as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. You say you guys must be rock stars. You do get to feel a little bit like a rock star because there's the comparison, you're not being compared to anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose like to that point as well, like there's so many. The first thing is even just describing, I'm like, they are creative. They are creative.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Totally.
often what the conversation is like realizing how much people self-define in that way. And often like it's strange, like we are paid to come into that space and be the creative force. And I'm like, but everyone is here too, right? There's like people solving problems creatively on a kind of daily basis. And sometimes it's our job to just remind people of that as well. But also something to your point, Jess, about feeling like an imposter in these corporate spaces. It's like, you come out of art school. I mean, like there was a stage both of us have had dreadlocks, all the now you're walking into these big, tall, shiny buildings in the city going up to the 25th floor. And I'm like, I don't even know what a KPI is. Like, I don't know what any of the language they're using is. So we'd both separately be wearing these like suits or you're trying to fit in to feel like less of an imposter. But over time, realizing that it's that point of difference that they are paying for. There's 1,000 people in suits in that building. There's only one person in like a full leopard print onesie, and that's part of it. Like sometimes being the imposter can be a strength.
The value.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads us perfectly into my burning question for the audience. We when thinking about how we were going to structure this conversation, because we are four people that can talk for an endless amount of time, and we only have an hour in here. So we're thinking, how do we structure this so we get the most, inject the most value and give opportunity for the audience to ask us some questions and give their input. So we came up with a burning question each. Except for you, I don't know where yours is.
Whoa!
Someone didn't
Under
do their
the bus.
Fully thrown under the bus. But true, three's more than enough.
It was my idea to come up with a burning question.
So that's your contribution.
And then Reece just dropped the mic, left it at that.
You guys do the work. I love that. And the other thing I wanted to explain before we crack into my burning question, selfishly, I'm going to throw that out first because it's just a great segue from your last talking point, is there's a little bell on the table for people who are listening audio only, and it sounds like this. That may be the only time, my colleague, that may be the only time you hear it, but the purpose is to see if we can keep each other on track and get to audience questions, because I'm super keen for that. All right. Explanations over. Time for burning question number 1. To what level should the things that we do define us or be a major part of our personal identity, and why? Ooh, deep question, right? Let it sink in for a second.
I've just jumped straight in. I think it's like inevitable as a creative, and I'm sure everyone maybe agrees that what they do and what they produce like feels like a part of them. And I recently have gone from fully absorbed in that being a full-time nacho into being one day a week as a nacho / after works. And there was a massive time period of kind of readjusting to that and being like, oh shit, I'm not what I do anymore, and like refiguring that out. So I'd love to hear other opinions on how to balance that, and what other people's experiences are with becoming what they do, or, it just feels like that's who you are.
Yeah. I think identity in general is such a big, complex, meaty subject, right? And I think you're right. Like, you can't help but you can't really separate yourself from your work in many ways as a creative person. And also there's an element of clubs and cliques, and everyone wants to belong to something, and that's useful until it's not. And if the entire weight of your identity is wrapped up in being a something, that at some point becomes unuseful because it stops you from being a something else. And it's something that's come up a lot in our conversations with each other and also guests on the podcast, not even just to do with work, but it's like if you grew up being the arty girl, then you feel like you're not allowed to be the sporty girl, or if you grew up being this, you know what I mean? So I think the most useful way we can view it is to try and take the pieces of things that really resonate with us and be like, well, what is it about being a filmmaker or a street artist or an illustrator that I really love, rather than being wrapped up in being the thing. It's like, I love communication, I love making people happy, I love connecting people with each other, because that then becomes a transferable part of your identity.
It's deeper, right? Like that's a more core thing that can be, as you say, transferred to a lot of different hows. It's like it's a what. Like, what do you do can rather than exactly how you do that is often I'm a filmmaker. No, I'm a communication expert, and I love connecting people and communicating with people, and that can be in heaps of different forms.
Yeah.
The reason that this question triggered me, Alice, was because I often hear the line from people making a distinction between them being creative or not creative, and I believe that every person is created to be creative, and it just looks different in a lot of different areas. But people have kind of put creativity in a box and said it has to be flamboyant, or it has to be artistic, or it has to be something like that. I had a situation that was a bit of a pivotal turning point for me where I moved from seeing myself as a filmmaker and my identity as being a filmmaker into one of being a entrepreneur and a business person, because that was a real challenge when I started Hebron Films with my mate Levi. We set out to make beautiful looking videos, and quickly realized that we needed to understand business if we wanted to continue making beautiful looking videos. And there was a point where I had a conversation with my bookkeeper, and she said, boys, you're going to have to lean into the science of business and learn how to be business people really, really well. And I was like, no, I can't do that. I'm a filmmaker. What if I become a business leader, then who am I? Because I'm a filmmaker. And that kind of kick-started a bit of a journey of me going back to a deeper, who am I? What do I bring to this world that no one else can bring? Because every single person has that, right? They're unique in a way that no one else is like them. So what do I bring to this world? And it doesn't need to be in the form of, a filmmaker or a business person. It gets to be what I define it to be, or how I contribute to the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And kind of building on that and what you both mentioned as well before, I think for me, there's always that tension, right? Like boundaries are helpful things in that they can contain and support us, but it's knowing the difference. It's like, when is this scaffolding? When is this a skeleton that's giving your body shape and enabling you? Or when is this something that's kind of chaining you down? And I know for me, it's been a long process of sort of ever since I was a centimeter tall. I was like, well, I'm an artist. Like, that's it. Full stop. Like, next question. I have never questioned that. And getting to a point kind of, and I had illustration on the side. Like, I finished uni, people paid me to draw. That was cool. But that was always kind of a side project to the idea of being able to work as an artist and make art. And getting into my 30s and realizing that, like, you can sometimes be holding on to one idea of you and your success and your meaning and whatever. And it's like, if you're holding on to that so tightly, you're missing all of the other potential around you, because at some point that means that the adult version of you is constrained to a story that was written by a child. And I mean, a kid has such simplified versions of reality. It's like, you're doing the best you can at that stage. But if I'm still living by what I thought success would be when I was 9, then I'm probably missing out on like quite a lot of other options. So like
having lots of lollies for breakfast.
yeah, exactly. I can stay up as late as I want. So for me, it's been like a really, and I think these things often sound really simple on reflection because we kind of package them up as like a neat story, but it's been messy. Like, I've spent the kind of last part of my late 20s and early 30s like in this slow and messy separation from this idea of Alice as artist, and kind of making a more nuanced picture of like, yep, I have my arts practice, I have my commercial illustration practice, I've recently been getting into tattooing. Like, all of these things feed into each other, they support each other, and that's like, okay, that doesn't mean failure. Actually, what the original failure was like an overly simplistic definition, I guess.
And so how have you landed? Like, how do you one thing that's really challenging in this area, and I think what brings such clear defined boxes that people feel comfortable in saying, is that you're meeting someone for the first time and they go, what do you do? I want to get to know you. You want to just be able to say, I'm a filmmaker, I'm an artist, I'm a this, I'm a that.
Imagine if you just read the bio each.
just 1 second.
I'm so glad you asked. Just roll the paper.
How do you communicate? Like, where have you landed, Alice, in that messy process of defining yourself and describing yourself?
Do you know, so now I say artist, which has taken me years. And when I was younger, I thought that was so pretentious and so cringy. But I think it's after a lifetime of, and this feeds in actually to that identity piece as well of like, for me, it's when I'm doing the work, when my hands are doing the thing, I feel very safe inside that. So I think, someone might dream of being a writer and they don't want to say that because they're not doing the writing. But I think the second you're doing the thing every day, you kind of earn that. So now I'm just like, artist is a good catch-all. And then depending on where the conversation goes from them, we can break down what version of that.
Yeah.
What do you guys say?
Depends on the audience and how much I can be bothered going into it. Usually my go-to would be Illustrator, so similar to how I would have explained it today. Essentially, I'm an illustrator, but most of what I do is called graphic recording. It's live illustration at conferences and workshops. I'm yet to get to... Alice and I made a joke that we should make caps that say "Ask me about my podcast."
Yes.
We'll make some for you.
Thank you.
But
I'm going to say
feel
ask
like-
you about our podcast though.
Oh yeah. But even though we're a year in, we're about to have our first birthday celebration for the podcast. I still feel very impostery. Sorry, see, I'm knocking the microphone. Never done a podcast in my life. Very much like an imposter in that world of things, whereas it's probably like this is where my heart is at the moment actually when I talk about where, like, ideally if I could just do podcasts 100% of the time, I'd be happy never to draw another picture again, to be perfectly honest. That's the thing that's setting my heart on fire at the moment. Just the opportunity to have interesting reflective conversations with a whole range of super awesome people is so great. But I don't really identify as podcaster yet.
Yep.
Haven't quite gotten there. What about you guys?
Well, I was thinking about how we all juggle so many different aspects of creativity on the daily or in a week, how many different projects we kind of take on. You guys are very similar in you've got a podcast as a bit of a side hustle and your creative practice and the money-making practice. So there's three that I can pick up on. I know you're involved in a bunch of community stuff and creative communities, and I've got 4 or 5 different fingers in pies, and it gets hard to identify which one you identify with closely, and it probably depends on who you're talking to as to which one you might sort of divulge into a little bit more. But it was something that we had discussed a little bit prior to meeting up today, was like how we juggle all those different elements, and you know, how to figure out what it is that you want to focus on and how to navigate all of those different aspects of being a creative or an imposter in certain aspects.
Yeah, this is one thing that, you know, I'm still searching for some good answers on, to be honest, because all of us only have so much time and we only have so much energy. And I'm kind of approaching or past hitting a ceiling on how many things I can be involved in, but there's still so many that I want to be. So, like, how do you choose which one that you say yes to, and then how do you protect that yes by saying no to some other great opportunities?
If you find out, let me know.
Maybe someone in the audience has an answer.
Yeah.
You solve my life problems. I think as well, like when you get used to, like trialing and failing at a bunch of things, and you throw out a bunch of seeds, but then sometimes all those seeds germinate at the same time. You're like, well, shit. I mean, I cared equally about all these things, and then you have to choose. And I think it's tricky. And I know that I am definitely someone who is seduced by the new and shiny. Like, I will get renewed energy for a new project, a new thing, and then trying to work out, is this where I should be placing my energy because this is where I want to move to or where I actually want to be right now? Or is it just this seduction of newness? And it's very hard to tell the difference, right? Because the feeling inside your body is the same. So I don't know. Alice, solutions?
It's such a great question. I don't know. The way that I'm trying, this is very much like a question that's on my mind constantly at the moment. So I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on it. The way that I'm kind of trying to do it is I imagine a 5-day work week, which is like an easy kind of pie with slices, each of those slices 20% of your time. And then I'm trying to find like a balance where ideally sort of 3 of those are on something that I know has to make me money and rent. And then the other 2 days, kind of one is on creative development, so stuff that might not have a financial return on investment immediately, but is long-term going to make me better at my craft, and I'll be able to raise my rates accordingly. And then that 5th kind of piece of the pie is like just expression and fucking around. And I might add, I do think that ultimately does have long-term value, but I also reserve the right for that. That doesn't have to be, we don't have to make everything fit into capitalism, and something doesn't have to be deserving of your time just because someone pays you for it as well.
Yeah,
so
financial gain.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the rough, that in my mind is like the goal of where I'd if life was structured kind of well, like maybe. I don't know.
That's really cool. Yeah, I love that. If you can fit in what you can do or need to do to make money in 3 days, and that can cover what you do, that's great. And then there's two other elements to the other two. One, you need to have enough creative reserves as a creative. If you're doing the creative thing for those 3 days, you have to be putting in what you are as much as you're giving out. Because that, as we all know, and we've probably all experienced it, that leads to burnout, is when you are giving more than you are putting in. So the learning and development day, it could be some of that, but that last day where you're actually just expressing and doing based on what you feel or you want, or you're chasing little rabbits down holes, and that I've found that personally helps me create balance, because it's not necessarily for me as the amount of things that I'm doing, but the energy I have to do those things and the fulfillment that I get from them. I experienced some mad burnout in about 2018 because I had just been on this hustle bandwagon in the business that I'd started in 2013, and I just didn't have anything left to give. I was giving 24/7 almost, dreaming about what I needed to do in business and getting home after work and just doing more business stuff. And I just got to the point where I had nothing left, and I'd sit at my desk literally doing nothing, like not even scrolling on social media. Like I'd sit at my desk and I'd be just sitting there, and then I'd go next door and get a coffee and talk to the barista, and then come back and work out how to plug my Xbox into one of the video monitors.
It's a scary place to be.
It was full on.
It's scary.
It was
when you're
scary.
in it.
But the thing that helped me start to change that around was I set aside half a day a week to just write, because it's on my heart, and I believe part of my destiny and where I'm going, my vision to create feature films. And so I've got a concept for a particular one that I've had since I was 14, and I'd never done anything with it. It had just been part of my story was saying that, I'll do this in the future. And I think that's a pretty common, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's a pretty common thing where you go, I've got dreams, but they're always in the future. I'll always do that later on. And so I just brought later on a bit closer and started writing for half a day, or really it started with like 10 minutes and then some kind of, I suppose you might call it meditation, quiet time, thinking time, reading, and then just a bit of creative output. That wasn't, I'm not a writer, but I started writing, and that was really, really helpful to create a bit of balance. But at the moment, I kind of look at things if I was going to tackle the question of how do you balance and how do you choose, I've got the foundation of family. I've got a young family now, which is phenomenal, and they are like my foundation. If my relationship isn't good, I'm very relationally led. So if I don't have a good connection with my wife and feel like I'm supporting my family and by spending some time with them, then that's the foundation. If that's not right, everything else is out the window. It doesn't matter what happens. Oh! Now go on, do it. No, go. So I build it on foundation, on layers. I'll stop there.
Yes, no, that was a really great explanation, though. Really appreciate it.
Can talk a lot.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
But I wanted to, if I'm allowed,
If I may.
the bell.
Frightened by the bell.
Just a couple of things that I think are really interesting from what you said, Caleb, around the sort of inputs and outputs, and not only with like rest and work, but one of the things that we talk to people about a lot is the idea of having a day job, and there can be some sort of like shame around that for people sometimes. I think, oh, if I'm an artist and I'm still working, you know, as a barista or have an office job or whatever, there's some sort of, internalized shame or embarrassment that like, well, I'm not a real artist then. But then actually having the inputs of life, of meeting people, making connections, doing stuff, you need that for the outputs of art making. So if it's just you in a studio with a paintbrush 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I mean, you can paint you in a studio with a paintbrush, you know what I mean? There's no more creative inputs happening. And I thought that was a really nice thing to discover, that it's not just the comfort of knowing you've got a steady income while you're building your arts practice or your creative business or whatever it is. There's actual value in that for you as a creative person beyond just the safety net of money. And I think viewing it in that way as a creative input to your life as well as the stability of money is useful.
Yeah, I've had that exact experience late last year, sort of splitting myself away from being self-employed for 7 days a week to doing it a couple of days a week, and the energy that I got from just going and doing someone else's job and being good at something else, and then the energy to work on the creative stuff just flooded back in almost instantly. It's like, damn, why couldn't I just generate that on my own? But financial was one of the big reasons, like not having to make sure the invoices are all sent and do all the admin and push through that was a huge. But I think also the interactions and learning new skills and venturing into a different industry were all super valuable for building up that energy to do what I was doing.
Yeah. Yeah, you never know what you're going to get out of a situation, whether it's meeting a person or learning a new skill or learning what you really, really don't want to do. I need to turn this other thing up so I never have to do that again, whatever
Still
it is.
a valuable experience.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got two amazing burning questions here. I'm going to go just down the list. Alice, you asked, what is the opposite of imposter syndrome and when do you feel it? Ooh, that's good. Ooh. What's the opposite of imposter syndrome? When do you feel it?
Can I have a go?
When's it
Oh
coming?
my God, please have a go. And can I just add, I typed that question and was like, you know how if you write the question, you should have an idea of the answer. I was like, I have no idea. I'm outsourcing this.
This is good.
So I've been thinking about this morning. So I think, well, firstly, what it's not. So the opposite of imposter syndrome is not arrogance, and I think people can make that mistake sometimes, feeling like, especially in Australia and especially for women, that there is an expectation that you should show up and diminish yourself immediately, and that's neutral, which I think is something that needs to change. So it's not arrogance. I also don't think it's even self-confidence. I think it's self-awareness maybe is the opposite of imposter syndrome, because it's knowing where you are on a timeline. So I think sometimes imposter syndrome can be mistaken as a few things, because maybe you're not an imposter, maybe you're just at the start. Maybe you're just a learner. Maybe you're just unqualified as well. That's a really dangerous one. You don't walk into do brain surgery as an illustrator and go, I just need to have more confidence in myself, But I think knowing where you are, which also means knowing when you are qualified. Yes, I do have those many years experiences. All of my tapestry of experience does qualify me to show up as an artist, as a podcast host, as whatever that thing might be. So I think the opposite of imposter syndrome maybe is self-awareness. And I think you feel it when you feel like you're showing up in a place as your whole self.
I can't fault that. That's amazing.
I also think there's a certain healthy level of imposter syndrome as well. When you recognize you're not the best of the best at it and you've got learning, you still recognize that there's learning to be done in a certain field. There's there's a healthy level of that, and then there's probably it reaches into being unhealthy and, a detriment to your own progress.
Could you call it humility?
Yeah, potentially. And maybe self-awareness comes into it too, right?
Yeah.
You're look, I'm not bad at this, but I'm not good either. I'm somewhere in between, and I don't know how to define when that's imposter syndrome versus being self-aware either.
Well, I mean, one good thing about there being so many different people in the world, one thing that's helped me even advise other people when they're trying to put together online courses, a lot of the most common first barrier is, I'm not the best at this in the world. I'm not the best. So I'm not qualified to teach anyone else. But the reality is that you will most probably have some value to add to someone that is earlier in their journey. You don't have to be the peak world expert at something to teach someone else something. If you are, you've got experiences, Reece, in street art as well as how to connect that with a corporate world, and right? So
We've had this conversation before. He tried to talk me into running a course.
I actually did.
Yeah.
I totally forgot about it. No, I'm bringing it back. and this
Reese's
is the
face, he's
time.
like, oh, I know what this is.
I've heard this pitch before.
I actually completely forgot about it, but thank you for bringing it back up. You're going to do a course. No, yes.
Caleb, can I
Yeah, of course.
build on that to say, like, yes, and I think, in fact, not only do you not need to be the best at something to have value to add in that space, but often I know, so this was probably 8 years ago before I left Cape Town, I did a yoga teacher training, not ever to teach, but just to kind of learn more, deepen that practice, whatever. But I remember very much feeling like an imposter in that space. I was always like the weird arty kid at school. I was never anywhere near anything that involved like sports or anything like that. And you're there, sort of learning in a space of people who are athletes, really, like who use their bodies professionally. And I remember at some point, the person training us said the best yoga teachers are not the people who are naturally athletic, because often when someone is naturally good at something, they're the worst teacher. Like they never had to learn. It's like learning, like the best teacher is someone who found that thing incredibly hard, because they're going to be completely equipped to meet you where you are and understand and explain things that the natural will find so intuitive that they don't even have language for it. So,
Wow.
so
Yeah,
sometimes that
that's
can
great.
be a strength, and like linking it to our work as well. That conversation we were saying in the beginning, it's like, what are these art kids doing on the 30th floor of Deloitte or whatever in town? It's like, no, like our job is not to get their business. Our job is to be the baby in the room. It's like, explain it more simple. Like the job is distilling all this content. So actually the thing that I used to feel insecure about, I'm like, oh God, I know nothing about business. What could I possibly have to add? Is like, my job is to take this thing and require you to distill it down to a point at which I can draw it. That's not a fault in the system. That's the strength of
That's
the
the value.
thing. Yeah.
I love that. All right, we've got a few more minutes left before I really want to get to some audience, because I can see all of your brains just buzzing. They're buzzing, which I can hear them. I want to unleash the thoughts. All right, Jessamy, another amazing question. How do you define or measure success? Who wants to take a stab at that?
Where do we start? That's such a tricky one.
How do you measure success?
I read that this morning in the car and I was furious.
Sorry.
I was like,
guys.
it's such a hard, like it's one of those questions.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like people throw it around like a platitude, like, oh yes, when you're self-reflecting, define it. But no one actually, like, try say out loud what you think success is. It's incredibly difficult.
I had some thoughts.
Okay.
I'm
Given
ready.
that was my
go.
my dick
Come on.
question, I'll answer it. And I think this changes all the time, right? But I think for me, it sits somewhere in having choice. I think maybe for me, like if I can wake up in the morning, if I can choose the kind of clients that I want to work with, if I can choose who I get to spend my time with, if I can choose to just like cuddle my dogs on the couch for an extra hour in the morning because I don't have the energy to do it, I feel like that is probably a pretty good marker of success.
You have done some thinking. That is excellent. Yeah, look, I love that, because especially one thing that people in business and entrepreneurs struggle with at the start of their business is they have to say yes all the time.
Yeah.
And that can be a little bit of a prison, because they need to bring the money in. They just need to. And they don't know, they haven't experienced the nightmare situations that inform their red flags when they're talking to potential new clients. Or maybe they have and they just can't afford to say no. or they can't afford to dictate the process as much because they have to do the work. And there comes a point, and it came a point in my building of my business, that we were actually able to change that story into people come to us to solve problems, and we're good at solving them, and we don't need to say yes to everyone. Thank the Lord. I would say I resonate with that explanation of success, is that we get to choose in business to an extent who we do work with and who we don't work with, but also how that looks. But then that extends, as you say, I think that does extend to everywhere else in your life. If you have the ability to decide what you're going to do each day, feels like success to me. What do you think, Reece?
Thanks for, you could see that I had a little spark, couldn't you?
Yeah, I could feel it. I could hear it.
I think I would like to, I would love it if I could say success was like enjoying the process more. So like rather than it being about an outcome that's like success, tick, it's like just loving it from start to finish. And then it's like you celebrate at the end, but it's not like a huge build up to then a success. It's like success in life is maybe just enjoying the process and like all of the moments that it has to bring, I think.
You know what?
Nice
I love that.
But that's only on reflection now, listening to people.
good.
I'm like, that would be nice to embed that a little bit more as like the meaning of success to me is appreciating all of the moments that come with it.
You know what? This is quite revealing of people's personalities, I think. It just reminded me, you saying that reminded me of, I love personality profiles and things, and it helps me understand people.
You're in the right crowd here.
Yeah. But one marker of success for, I think, you and I is enjoyment. If it's not fun, it's not worth doing. And that's not the same for everyone. Some people need the marker of success might be doing something right or winning or doing so. And that's totally valid. That's not, how dare you?
Yeah.
But for me, and it sounds like for you too, Reece, that we need to have fun, and that definitely plays into a marker of success for sure.
The last guest that we had on our podcast has fun in his contract for his staff. That it has to be fun is an item on their contract.
That's
Contractual
So
fun.
cool.
Yeah, it's great.
good.
It's really, really cool. Like that, and yes, that's the thing that I think for me, joy is at the heart of everything I do, but enjoying the process I think is such a good point because it never ends, does it? Like I don't know how often I've been guilty of saying like I just need to get through this week, this project, this whatever. But guess what? There's another fucking week after this week. Like the weeks go on forever. So if that's what you're doing, then you're wishing your life away, and that's not cool.
Wow. No way.
Yeah, those are all. My head is kind of spinning, and I'm also just trying to absorb those answers. And I agree wholeheartedly. I think what's interesting about defining success for me, because when I was thinking about this, I was kind of my first almost knee-jerk reaction is like, some kind of platitude, like, to be happy, right? I mean, that feels like a good and worthy goal. But then I was kind of unpacking that, and it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it's not, because it's like, okay, but like there's your overall kind of blanket happiness level in your life or kind of sense of joy or peace. But then there's like moment to moment stuff. And I'm perfectly happy to, sometimes you're working on a job that you love and is giving you meaning and it's really shit in the moment, but it's still making you happy. Like it might not be sustainable. You might not always want to live in that moment of stress, but it feels good and meaningful, and there's something in that growth or challenge. So it's not quite as simple as that. So yeah, to your process point, Reece, like I think it's finding meaning in that process, and a healthy relationship to that process. And I think for me, and I don't quite know how to word this, but there's also something in the idea of success. Like I feel like if life was like an orange or something, and you were just gonna like squeeze all the juice out of it, that there's something in there. Like I feel like at the end of all of this, to know that it's not about the achievement, but it's like that I lived my Alice-ness and that you lived your Caleb-ness or your Jessamy-ness or your recent, like that whatever it was for you to have done, that I can kind of hand on my heart say that I like did that thing.
You were you.
Yeah,
Not anyone
yeah.
else.
I mean, it's
good,
it
though.
sounds so cheesy to say,
No,
but I'm
it's
like, yeah,
good.
that for me would be success because me being Warren Buffett and running a Fortune 500 company and being a billionaire would not be a successful Alice.
That's kind
just
of
wouldn't.
full circle back to self-awareness. Like you need to know what your thing is, what your uniqueness is, and what fulfills you in the process. And then through that, we'll be somewhere close to success. I'd say.
I think that's a great comment and statement to sort of wrap up on and throw to the crowd because we've got about 10 minutes left. And I was thinking like maybe people have questions or they have comments about any of the, not necessarily a question, but maybe something to add about any of the questions that have come up, which I'll just quickly repeat because I can see Caleb's screen here. To what level should the things we do define us or be a major part of our personal identity and why? What's the opposite of imposter syndrome? When do you feel it? Or when do you define or measure success? Sorry, how do you define? So does anyone want to like chip in, have a question?
Release your buzzing
Dave.
thoughts. Release them.
Great, thank you. That was a great conversation. I don't know if it's a question or a comment. I haven't really fully formed it yet, but it's around that concept of success for you guys being around enjoying something. And I'm wondering if any of you have experienced maybe earlier in your careers where you think, I really love doing this creative practice and I'd love to do this for a career or, as a way to earn income, and then had to overcome a feeling of, now that I'm starting to charge money for this, all the joy seems to be going out of this.
So
And then how do you get over that so that you continue to enjoy it and make money?
That is so good, and I can see we all relate to it at this table. One quick story is when Levi and I started the business, we just had fun making videos. And one time we went down to Melbourne and we just made like 3 videos of me on a pogo stick in the middle of the road at night. And it was super fun. And we cut it together to some random songs and they were hilarious. And that was fulfilling. But totally later on, we were making videos every day, all day. And the last thing I wanted to do on the weekend or when I got home was make a video.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that. I'd just been doing it for everyone else and I had no more energy left to do it for myself. That's a good question. I've only got that.
I think it's a bit of a pivot. Like I started off as a graphic designer thinking I wanted to draw every day and be the pixel pusher. But it turns out I wanted to make things happen. Maybe you get a bit of more of a realization and an in-depth idea of what it actually is that makes you tick. Like it evolves and changes. And I don't know if it ever stays the same or is a stagnant kind of thing that it definitely can change and evolve. And so for me, it was sort of like realizing that, which can be hard and challenging, and then taking steps to kind of adapt and find yourself more in the place, which kind of opened me up to maybe do more of my own artwork. If I'm not the one doing the art as a job, it opened me up to enjoy that, but still find meaning in the work that I was doing as more of a producer, project manager kind of role, still helping creative things happen. That's my personal experience with it.
I think it changes a bit over time, and although Alice and I do very similar work, I think we come at it from quite different places. So I mean, people often ask, do you ever do your own arts practice anymore? The honest truth to that is I never did. Like I like to draw and I'm good at drawing, but for me, it's not an expression of my heart. I like to express myself through fashion and through dance, but it's not like the drawing for me is a craft and it's a service. It's not the expression. So I love doing it. But for me, I was just lucky that I could find a way to make it a service. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be doing it in this way. And a bit like what you said earlier about making the transition from a creative to a creative business owner or a creative entrepreneur, what I wasn't expecting, like at the start, and you're like, I just want to draw the pictures and I want to do all the invoicing and the business stuff and the marketing. now I've flipped and I have a contractor network, and I actually get really creatively inspired by the business side of things. So I think maybe like holding things a little lightly and remaining open to how else your creativity might manifest itself. But I know that your experience, Alice, has been a little different than that.
Yeah, that was a perfect time. We come at the same job from very different backgrounds and also dispositions as well. Something, and I don't know how this is going to say when I say it out loud, but like I've gone through waves of that many, many times over the years, and something that I've found very helpful is also like releasing myself from the obligation to always enjoy it. Because sometimes I found that I got into it because I love drawing, and there have been years at a time. There were like 3 years where I was just like, I hate that. There was not a single piece of paper in my house where I doodled anything. If it was someone's birthday, I wouldn't even draw on their card. It was so dead to me, and I never thought it would come back. And I was like, well, I've murdered that, but it's my career. Well, it's too late. It's dead. Whatever. I guess it's my job now. Fine. And I'll find other pursuits that I find fulfilling. And almost like letting go of needing, like it will change, right? Like your relation to your craft is, I think, always going to change. And it's like it's okay for it to not be the same. And I've found it again recently. Like at the moment, I'm so into drawing. I'm like loving drawing in a way that I haven't for years. But I think it's because I took that pressure off myself. And then another thing that I've also found with that stuff, specifically with drawing and illustration, which I have a very love-hate relationship with. I'm very lucky it's my career, but we have a complex relationship. Is also sometimes to like lean into it, and I like double down into it. So I'm like, the thing that I don't want to do, I'm like, maybe it's because I'm not feeling pushed or challenged. So it's like I draw every day. I have a stockpile of images that I kind of like whip out for most jobs and I feel really safe with. So I'm like, what if I actively look at like where is the work that I can't do? Who's doing work that I think is super cool right now that's like out of my league? And then playing in that, like pushing yourself to play out of your league again, it like sharpens you up straight away, and then you're like, oh yeah, I do love this. This is real good. I don't know if that's helpful.
That's cool.
That's very cool.
Thanks for the question, Dave. Anyone else? Andre, our number one Country Creators podcast fan. Thank you, Andre.
Hey, Reece. Just a comment about imposter syndrome is that it's interesting to me that a lot of very famous artists or very, very successful artists, whether it's visual art or rock stars, they still sometimes question themselves and their ability. And I think as creatives, I think we are predisposed to sometimes question what we're doing and if we're good enough. But I remember at one of my exhibitions I had that was very successful, a friend of mine said to me, mate, if you ever doubt yourself, just remember the success of this exhibition. So if you can look at what you've done and you've had success in your life and in your career, you can always use that as a backup to remind you that you are good enough. And I remember Robbie Williams, the famous rock star, took a year off touring. He was selling out stadiums, but he thought he was no good and he couldn't tour for a while. So that's just a comment on the imposter syndrome.
Actually, a really great answer, isn't it? Like
That's excellent.
Remembering back to when you nailed it, because those thoughts kind of can be fleeting, can't they? Those memories.
It's the concept of the cookie jar that, if anyone's read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, he's plays in the mental toughness and physical endurance space, but it describes this concept of putting your past milestones and successes in a cookie jar, that when you're in the moment of it being really, really hard, you can draw from that cookie jar and go, oh, that's right, I did experience success here, here, and here. And that fuels you to go forward. And I think it's pretty similar to what you're saying, Andre, in that the fact that you're using that exhibition as a marker to remind yourself that, no, I actually have done something great before. I have experienced some success before. So when it's hard now, it can help me push me further, push me on. It's cool.
That's awesome.
Like it.
Are there any other final wrap-up questions, comments?
Can I make one last comment? Just because it's like I keep thinking of this now that we've chatted about it. Is just the fact of also remembering like how completely universal this feeling is.
Yeah.
And like, I think that, because even while we were driving here this morning, I was thinking about it and I was like, over the course of the last year, we've been doing this podcast and just like the complete appetite that there is out there for people wanting to talk about this thing called imposter syndrome, and how sort of heartbreaking and also hilarious it is that it's like everyone is feeling the feeling of feeling like they don't belong. But if everyone's feeling the thing, then it automatically connects you with everyone. And it's actually this like deeply human thing. It's kind of like, it's like you're the opposite of being an imposter. It's kind of part of it. And I literally worked at a corporate event the other day where it was like business mentors and these kind of like young businessy folks in their suits looking so fancy and whatever. And that was the predominant thing that came out of their meeting. The major thing holding these kind of, you know, MBA graduates back is exactly the same thing that we talk about in these more kind of creative circles. I'm like, oh, everyone's just making it up, guys. It's okay. Sometimes just saying it out loud is the thing.
Yeah, that's it. And I think the more we can have these conversations about what our lives actually look like, the fears and doubts and failures and successes that we have, like one of our first ever guests, a poet called Alice Allen, said, if we don't share with each other what our lives actually look like, then we're just playing on hard mode forever because we're comparing ourselves to something that simply doesn't exist.
Wow.
That's amazing. And
Love that.
I think that's a great moment to wrap up. Thank you to our live audience today, to our guest, the Imposter Syndrome.
Thank you, Country Creatives.
Yes, thanks so
thank
much
you,
for
Amy.
having us.
Yeah, a shout out to Amy for organising this coming together of podcasts. Yeah, thank you so much
Superhero
for
team up.
making us sound good at the end of it as well.
Thanks, team.
Thank you for listening to the Imposter Syndrome Club. Please follow us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you're feeling extra kind, rate and review. Or if you got any insights or value from this, share with a friend.
You can also find us on Instagram at ImposterPod or online at impostersyndromeclub.com.